Good evening, everyone, dear colleagues, dear guests, dear Thomas. My name is Eduardo Altman. For those of you who don't know me, I think almost everyone in the room knows me by now, but I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Käthe Hamburger Center for Apocalyptic and Post-Apocalyptic Studies, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you all this year to this year's CAPAS Distinguished Lecture. Every year, the series brings to Heidelberg a scholar whose work not only advances cutting-edge debates in the humanities and social sciences, but also resonates deeply with the main concerns of our center, and it is a highlight of our academic program. This evening is also a special occasion for CAPAS, as it marks the first distinguished lecture of our second funding period. In this sense, tonight's event is not only an academic gathering, but also a symbolic new beginning for the center of sorts, an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to foster interdisciplinary research on the critical conditions of the present. It is therefore especially meaningful that we open this new chapter with Thomas Lemke, whose work exemplifies the intellectual depth, openness, and critical imagination that continue to guide CAPAS in its second phase. Thomas Lemke is professor of sociology at Goethe University Frankfurt am Main with a focus on biotechnologies, nature, and society. And at Goethe University, he also serves as speaker for the research training group Fixing Futures, Technologies of Anticipation in Contemporary Societies, funded by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. His scholarship stands at the intersection of sociology, political theory, and philosophy, and is animated by a constant concern with how knowledge, life, technology, and power are intertwined in contemporary societies. I'm going to give him a brief CV of Thomas, even though I'm sure he doesn't need it at this point, but I'm still going to do it. Lemke studied political science, sociology, and law at Goethe University in Frankfurt and the University of Southampton, and at the Université de Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne. He receives his PhD from Goethe University Frankfurt in 1996, and his habilitation in sociology from the University of Wuppertal in 2006. His academic trajectory has since combined remarkable intellectual depth with international reach. He has held teaching and research appointments at the University of Wuppertal, the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt, and since 2008 at Goethe University. He has also been a visiting professor or fellow at the university at numerous institutions across the globe, including Goldsmiths College in London, New York University, Copenhagen Business School, the Centre Michel Foucault in Paris, and the University of New South Wales in Sydney, where he continues to serve as a honorary professor, at least according to his CV, which I hope is updated, right? Thomas' distinguished career has been recognized through major awards and grants, among them the European Research Council Advanced Grant for his project CRYOSOCIETIES, the Opus Magnum grant from the Volkswagen Foundation for the Government of Things, and a Heisenberg Fellowship from the German Research Foundation. These achievements reflect not only his international reputation, but also his sustained effort to rethink the relationship between life, knowledge, and power in our, I would say, us in CAPAS would say, apocalyptic age of biotechnology and planetary crisis. Lemke is one of the most influential contemporary thinkers in social theory, biopolitics, and the sociology of science and technology, having published over 15 monographs and edited volumes, which have been translated into numerous languages, including Chinese, Danish, Dutch, English, of course, Korean, Polish, Portuguese, Turkish, and Italian. From his early, now classic analysis of biopolitics and governmentality, which introduced Michel Foucault's concepts to the German-speaking world and decisively shaped its international reception, to his more recent investigations into genetic governance, synthetic biology, and the politics of anticipation, Thomas has consistently shown how emerging technologies not only transform the material conditions of life, but also reshape the very categories through which we understand it. In our second funding phase, CAPAS is structured around annual topics, each inviting us to explore key concepts at the intersection of collapse, revelation, and renewal. Our first annual topic is biopolitics, a theme that examines how life itself becomes the object of governance, control, and speculation, a line of inquiry that could hardly find a more fitting interlocutor than Thomas Lemke. His book, Biopolitics, An Advanced Introduction, based on the German original Biopolitik zur Einführung, now in its third edition, since it first appears, is it the third edition? Yes. since it first appeared almost 2 decades ago, remains a trailblazing contribution to the field. It continues to shape the way we understand the political investment in life, the shifting boundaries between biology and society, and the subtle techniques through which contemporary power assemblages sustain themselves. That this text still serves the point of departure for new generations of scholars speaks to the enduring significance of Lemke's work and to the foresight with which he anticipated many of the issues we are grappling with today. Equally groundbreaking is his book Foucault's Analysis of Modern Governmentality, originally developed from his doctoral dissertation Eine Kritik der politischen Vernunft. Based on extensive archival research, unpublished material, and recordings of Foucault's lectures at the Collège de France, this study reconstructs one of Foucault's most significant and yet at the time least accessible contributions, the genealogy of modern governmentality. The book not only offered one of the earliest and most rigorous interpretations of Foucault's political thought, but also provided the most comprehensive bibliography of his socio-political writings at the time, establishing itself as a tool for what Lemke aptly calls a critique of political reason. This pioneering engagement with Foucault's governmentality lectures continues to shape how we understand the articulation of power, life, and subjectivity, issues that lie at the very heart of our annual theme on biopolitics, as I mentioned in the second funding phase, which will be followed precisely by the topic subjectivities. Another major contribution is his most recent monograph, The Government of Things, Foucault and the New Materialisms. Here, Thomas Lemke engages with contemporary renaissance of materialist thought, offering one of the most comprehensive and lucid critical assessments of what has come to be known as new materialism. In dialogue with thinkers such as Jane Bennett and Karen Barad, he explores how this heterogeneous current challenges anthropocentrism, I always have a hard time speaking this word, anthropocentrism, and redefines the relation between matter, agency, and power. In revisiting Foucault's modern human understanding of government, the book identifies a new constellation of power concerned with steering the social, ecological, and technological conditions of life itself. With this work, Lemke once again provides an indispensable tool for rethinking the politics of life in the 21st century, and it resonates deeply with CAPA's concern for the planetary entanglements of the apocalyptic present. At CAPAS, we aim to study apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic realities and imaginaries, not as esoteric visions of the end, but as diagnostic tools for our contemporary condition, as moments and figures that reveal the fractures, contradictions, and thresholds of our world. We examine apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic visions and scenarios as ways of understanding how societies confront or postpone confronting the possibility of their own end. Professor Lemke's notion of analytics of suspension, which we will elaborate tonight, provides a strikingly original framework for analyzing precisely these dynamics. It opens a new conceptual vocabulary for grasping the liminal states that define our times, zones where life is neither fully alive nor fully dead, where decisions are indefinitely deferred, where facts lose solidity, and where affects oscillate between anxiety and denial. Thomas, we are deeply grateful that you accepted our invitation. Your intellectual trajectory embodies the kind of scholarship we strive to cultivate at CAPAS, one that interrogates the conditions of our possible futures while never losing sight of their political stakes. On a more personal note, it's a real joy for me to welcome you here, as during my very first research stay in Germany over 10 years ago, you were the first host to receive me, so thank you. And please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. Thomas Lemke to deliver his lecture, The Bomb Beneath the Table, Elements of an Analytics of Suspension.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Eduardo, for this very kind and generous presentation. But it also leaves me with a certain uneasiness because now after this presentation, I can only fail, you know. And you already know that this is convincing what I'm going to present, you know. I'm not so sure about this. And I would also like to thank the organizers for the invitation to give this lecture. And it's a rare opportunity to present an argument for a very long time. I'm going to speak about an hour. And I planned to provide you with a PowerPoint presentation. I got ill, and therefore there won't be a PowerPoint presentation. So it will be quite a challenge for you to follow this kind of raw text presentation without any visual aid or technical support. And I'm curious to see how it turns out. So some kind of archaic experience might be some kind of academic torture, actually, because as I said, it will be. I will speak for quite a while and try to make it as comprehensible as possible. But I think from the argument, it's quite challenging. And I will start with something that, in a way, also relates to the past that happened a long time ago. I will start with a quote from the 1960s, and I'm sure some of you will remember or recognize the quote, namely in 1962, Alfred Hitchcock, the famous filmmaker, explained in an interview with François Truffaut, himself a well-known French director and film critic, the distinction between suspense and surprise that is crucial to his way of making films. And now the longer quote from Hitchcock: "There is a distinct difference between suspense and surprise, and yet many pictures continually confuse the two. I'll explain what I mean. We are now having a very innocent little chat. Let's suppose that there's a bomb underneath this table between us. Nothing happens, and then all of a sudden, boom. There is an explosion. The public is surprised, but prior to this surprise, it has seen an absolutely ordinary scene of no special consequence. Now, let us take a suspense situation. The bomb is underneath the table and the public knows it, probably because they have seen the anarchists place it there. The public is aware the bomb is going to explode at 1 o'clock, and there is a clock in the decor. The public can see that it's 1:45. In these conditions, the same innocuous conversation becomes fascinating because the public is participating in the scene. The audience is longing to warn the characters on the screen, you shouldn't be talking about such trivial matters, there's a bomb beneath you and it's about to explode. In the first case, we have given the public 15 seconds of surprise at the moment of the explosion. In the second, we have provided them with 15 minutes of suspense. The conclusion is, whenever possible, the public must be informed, except when the surprise is a twist, that is, when the unexpected ending is in itself the highlight of the story." End of the quote. Hitchcock clearly prefers suspense over surprise because it engages the public both intellectually and emotionally. It involves them in storytelling by making them anticipate what may happen or not happen. It grants the audience the privilege of knowledge that is unavailable to the characters, knowledge that elicits anxiety or other emotional responses. Suspense is distinctive because it engages the viewer as a participant in the story, creating a dual experience of control and uncertainty. Hitchcock's understanding of suspense relied on a specific mindset or shared experience of the public, which helped make his films popular. He made his major films during the Cold War period. The threat of nuclear destruction and the idea of mutual deterrence created what Daniel Caudle once called states of suspense, characterized by ongoing risk and the continual postponement of nuclear war. Apocalyptic scenarios imagining the end of the world through nuclear annihilation were common for much of the second half of the 20th century. This was also the area when the doomsday clock was introduced, a symbolic timepiece created by atomic scientists in 1947 to show how close humanity is to a global catastrophe, with midnight representing total destruction or doomsday. Based on the perceived threats posed by nuclear weapons, the minute hand moved closer to or further from midnight. The Cold War has ended, but the doomsday clock remains with us. In January 2025, the clock was set to 89 seconds before midnight, the closest it ever come to doomsday. However, several aspects differ from Hitchcock's way of linking suspense to the imaginary of the clock and the bomb. First, regarding the bomb, we note that apocalyptic scenarios have multiplied. Beyond nuclear war, now new challenges, ranging from global warming and biodiversity loss to food scarcity, pandemic risks and the rise of artificial intelligence, have entered the scene as potential causes for doomsday visions. The singular risk of nuclear war has expanded into a multitude of threats that are measured and evaluated by the doomsday clock. And second, we might wonder if the image of the clock is still appropriate today. Is there still a clock ticking? Is there a time before the device explodes? Does a countdown still exist we can rely on? It may be that we are already witnessing the explosion without perceiving its destructive power. The future may have already arrived and the harm is present, at least for some. For diagnosing the present, the clock and bomb imaginary are misleading because they are rooted in the Cold War mindset of the later half of the 20th century, which follows a linear concept of time and emphasizes the singularity of the disastrous event. In the following, I draw inspiration from the debate on slow apocalypse, or more specifically, slow emergencies. This field of research does not view catastrophe or disasters as extraordinary events, immediately recognizable and unique breaks in the flow of time. Instead, it emphasizes experiences of what Laurent Ballon called crisis ordinariness, where devastation, suffering, violence, and extinction often go unnoticed, even if they cause significant harm. These are often not recognized as exceptional or urgent enough for collective action, thereby perpetuating harm and maintaining conditions that obscure any clear distinction between everyday life and emergency events. Slow emergencies thus challenge both the existing ways we represent and categorize harm and suffering, and demonstrate how neglect can lead to stagnant and disastrous situations. Building on and broadening this line of thought, the lecture aims to explore mechanisms of suspension in contemporary societies. It examines the idea that extreme slowness can lead to motions of stillstand and immobility, creating experiences of liminality where things appear to be frozen or on hold. I will interpret these liminal states as forms of suspension, drawing on the rich etymology of the term. Suspension may mean postponement and deferral, but also refraining from decisive action. It relates to doubt and uncertainty, as well as to hanging from a support. Rather than pursuing the project of a theory of suspension, I aim to empirically explore different aspects of what could be called a politics of suspension. I propose distinguishing 4 distinct yet interconnected and related modes of suspension: ontological, temporal, epistemological, and affective. The first involves ontological suspension, achieved through technologies that use extreme cold to preserve organic material, keeping it in a liminal state between life and death. The second mode of suspension extends the present by delaying decisions and deferring choices. It also operates through promises of recognition, ongoing fears of loss, and the precarious and provisional nature of entitlements and benefits. Epistemological suspension systematically challenges scientific evidence, fostering confusion and mistrust and undermining social truth claims. And the fourth and final mode of suspension centers on exploiting a particular affective state. Disavowal provides an individual and collective response to the experience of traumatic facts and the numerous crises faced by contemporary societies by reducing anxiety and suspending the responsibility to act. Although these modes of suspension may seem unrelated, it could be useful to identify shared characteristics and complementarities. Let me begin with some findings of a recently completed research project that I directed. The project examined social dimensions of cryopreservation practices. The process of freezing biological samples such as cells, tissues, or organs at very low temperatures to preserve their viability for future use. Cryopreservation practices thrived during the Cold War. The threat of nuclear destruction not only froze the geostrategic boundaries between the two political and military blocs. The apocalyptic scenarios of the Cold War also spurred the development of technologies aimed at safeguarding the continuity of vital processes and ensuring survival in the post-war period. As a result, the decades after 1945 saw significant technological advances in cryobiology. Researchers found that biochemical changes slow dramatically when living cells are cooled to extremely low temperatures. Today, cryopreservation practices are an essential infrastructural element for numerous medical applications and a key driver of scientific innovation. The practice of cold storage for tissue samples and cells is crucial for pharmaceutical research, cell therapies, and drug development, serving as a technological platform for a broad range of activities in the biomedicine and biosciences. The research project Suspended Life, Exploring Cryopreservation Practices in Contemporary Societies, was based on the thesis that cryopreservation enacts a state beyond or between life and death. Suspended life denotes an unsettling liminal ontological constellation where biological substance is neither fully alive nor definitely dead. Cryopreservation practices enable the interruption and resumption of metabolic processes, effectively pausing the growth and development of cells and tissues to allow storage for an indefinite period, at least in principle. The technological ability to successfully freeze and thaw human and non-human organic material has enabled the development of cryobanks as a new archival apparatus to store vital matter at low temperatures over long periods. These frozen archives serve both as repositories of stored biomaterials and as active sites where these materials are processed for future use. They resemble electronic devices and material infrastructures on standby, neither fully active nor completely off. They function in a sleep mode, embodying a state of limbo that is ready for reactivation, a transitional state of inactivity that signifies preparedness without immediate action. Suspended life is often mobilized in anticipatory modes of government. One example is the ontopolitics of suspension in the long-term storage of human egg cells. As feminist STS scholarship has shown, oocyte cryopreservation further medicalizes the female body, creating a new condition, anticipated infertility. This replaces the normal course of ovarian aging with a pathological state of future infertility, which must be monitored and managed in the present. In this respect, egg freezing no longer responds to a reactive need to treat existing infertility, but instead anticipates future reproductive challenges. By depicting fertility as precarious and promoting egg freezing as a treatment, this anticipatory medicalization significantly broadens the patient base of fertility services, including all premenopausal reproductive bodies, even those with no immediate plans to have children. The politics of suspended reproduction also embodies a specific form of gender politics, although some commentators argue that egg freezing broadens reproductive choices. Empirical evidence offers a different interpretation. Studies demonstrate how gendered ideologies of motherhood and parenthood shape women's decision to cryopreserve their eggs. Rather than exercising genuine choice, these women secure potential options to avoid regret and future self-blame. As previously noted, the scope of cryobanks extends beyond human material to include archives that cryopreserve gametes, tissues, or DNA of animals. For many decades, freezing and storing animal biospecimens have been vital for advancement in human medicine and agriculture. However, it is only recently that cryogenic procedures have become essential to biodiversity research and conservation efforts. Relevant cryobanks such as the San Diego Frozen Zoo or CryoArk are considered of central importance amidst the decline and extinction of species. However, wildlife cryobanks have become more than just repositories for archiving and documentation. They also store material resources for reanimation strategies. Drawing on fields such as resurrection biology or de-extinction science, these cryobanks aim to bring back to life species that are already extinct through reproductive and genetic technologies. In the context of what Jeremy Walker has termed a new political economy of extinction, wildlife cryobanks not only store organic material in a liminal state, existing between life and death, they embody a liminal space between preventative conservation strategies and the reverse engineering of biodiversity. Like a picture puzzle, wildlife cryobanks are characterized by a dual developmental process. They can be mobilized to preserve the present variants of species and at the same time promote the future expansion of biological diversity through new species using biotechnological practices. In this sense, synthetic biology may be of central importance for safeguarding and enhancing biodiversity, as George Church and Edward Regis claim in their book Regenesis, How Synthetic Biology Will Reinvent Nature and Ourselves. I quote, "Today we are at the point in science and technology where we humans can reduplicate and then improve what nature has already accomplished. And we too can create genetic diversity, adding to the considerable sum of it that nature has already produced." End of quote. In the following, I propose a broader understanding of the politics of suspension that does not depend on cryopreservation practices, but instead concentrates on more general forms of governing through suspension in contemporary societies. I will shift the focus from suspended life in cryopreservation to forms of suspension which are becoming increasingly important today, creating practices of precarity and exploiting mechanisms of provisionality and revocability. I will begin with strategies of temporal suspension and propose a distinction between two main variants. The first is a politics of deferral, which seeks to postpone decisions and prolong the present. The second strategy operates through mechanisms of abeyance. It permanently shifts the costs and risks of government onto specific individuals and populations by promoting graduated rights, stratified forms of inclusion and exclusion, and withholding or granting access to political resources or social assistance. Instead of prolonging the present, it punctuates it. Rather than functioning on the principle of reversibility, it operates by revocability. I will address the two variants one by one. More than 40 years ago, Sheila Robotham, Lynn Siegel, and Hilary Wainwright identified a politics of deferral within left movements, which continually postpones addressing essential questions such as those concerning feminist issues until the socialist revolution is achieved. Once positioned at the margins of the political spectrum, this chronopolitical strategy has now become a central feature of contemporary government. It defines a politics that seeks to manage conflicting or even contradictory objectives by delaying decision-making. The politics of deferral leaves contentious issues unresolved while giving the illusion of progress, favoring short-term arrangements and delaying definitive resolution. In this view, deferral is not merely a provisional or intermediate state or a temporary zone marked by a telos of completion, saturation, and fulfillment. Rather, it exemplifies a way of handling contradictions without questioning the material conditions that generate them. Temporal suspension allows conflicting expectations and interests to coexist, suppresses opposition and dissent, and reproduces control and authority by signaling the intent to address the issues without actually taking the necessary measures to engage with these issues. It favors provisional settlements while postponing long-term solutions, thereby prolonging the present and keeping it within a logic of reversibility. The politics of suspension helps explain why political actors or regulatory bodies appear both highly active in problem-solving and incapable of providing solutions. Instead of viewing deferral as a failure to act, hypocrisy, or a gap between the official program and its selective or discriminatory implementation, it offers an alternative critique that sees the politics of suspension as a mode of government in its own right, shaping a dynamic constellation that ultimately aims to maintain the status quo. Examples include the way how accounting firms, multinational corporations, and financial institutions exercise control over the global standardization of environmental accounting since the 2010s. As Salome Duguay shows, this standardization process undermines the institutional power and the ontological foundations of accounting. As a result, environmental accounting remains in a state of non-resolution. I quote her, "Resolution requires decisive climate action and therefore a broad renegotiation of the capitalist political economic system that sustain elite authority and status. In the absence of such transformation, climate politics is likely to remain governed by suspension." End of quote. There is a second strand of temporal suspension that gives rise to a different form of government. Here the present is rather punctuated than extended. It operates by abeyance instead of deferral. The politics of abeyance creates liminal subject positions where individuals are neither fully included nor outright excluded from political and economic systems. Instead, they are provisionally attached to these systems as if hanging by a thread. It operates by ongoing promises of recognition, persisting fears of loss, obscure institutional structures, erratic regulatory procedures, and the precarious and provisional nature of entitlements and benefits. As many researchers in anthropology, sociology, and STS have emphasized, it is associated with a particular affective constellation of insecurity, disjointness, undecidability, and indeterminacy. It renders obsolete any sense of linearity or progress in the present, creating a feeling of dissolution and disruption, undermining the prospect of a calculable and plannable future. The politics of suspension, by promoting insecurity and indeterminacy, is especially relevant in the contemporary government of migration. Asylum seekers and refugees often remain in an unclear legal status for many years, awaiting the outcome of their cases and occupying an ambiguous position as being, as someone put it, at once citizens in waiting and deportees in waiting. The uncertain prospect of refuge and the threat of expulsion create an existential limbo, or confronting them with a situation of indefinite and unpredictable waiting. By promoting regulatory opacity and endless waiting, this migration regime operates by postponing decisions regarding social belonging and legal recognition. It maintains precarity and insecurity, contributing to ongoing suffering and increasing vulnerabilities. However, these forms of suspension are by no means limited to the goal of freezing migration from the global south to northern countries, or an exclusive characteristic of liberal regimes. Instead, they are present in a wide range of countries and political systems, encompassing neoliberal practices as well as authoritarian, populist, and post-colonial forms of government. Understanding suspension as a chronopolitical strategy challenges its traditional meaning. It is not seen as an interval or an interruption to the normal and natural sequence of events, something that hinders or obstructs them. It is not the opposite of action, but rather an active force that cuts through the present. This conceptual revision challenges its conventional passive and negative understanding. In this reading, temporal suspension is not characterized by a passivity that stops or interrupts the continuous chain of events, but rather an active mode of generating and promoting processes of indeterminacy, opacity, and insecurity. Therefore, in contemporary societies, holding subjects in suspension is not something political authorities seek to avoid or mitigate. Instead, it is actively cultivated and exploited. It contributes to the uneven distribution of economic and political resources, establishing social cleavages, and enacts racialized structures of entitlements and discriminatory institutions of care. Taking serious this property of the in-betweenness, it is necessary to move beyond oppositional states to study processes of oscillation. The focus then is not on alternatives, but on alterations and the movement of pendular swings between different states of opening and closing, invocations and revocations. Like mechanisms of deferral and managing contradictions, the politics of abeyance enables the coexistence of seemingly mutual exclusive principles, promising and revoking assistance, cultivating hope and generating fear, granting and denying rights. It creates subject positions characterized by suffering from frustrated desires, fragmented belongings, and precarious security. The analysis so far has focused on mechanisms of temporal suspension that punctuate and extend the present. However, another mode of government in contemporary societies enacts epistemological suspension by systematically challenging scientific evidence and fostering confusion and mistrust. In this case, we could replace the temporal perspective with a chemical understanding of suspension. I'm not sure if this is already working. Anyway, chemically, a suspension is a heterogeneous mixture where particles are dispersed in a liquid but do not dissolve. Again, we need to distinguish two subsets of this mode of fluidization of solid truth claims, doubt and disorientation. Exemplifying the first type of epistemological suspension is the tobacco strategy, which Naomi Orestes and Eric M. Conway analyze in their well-acclaimed book, Merchants of Doubt, how a handful of scientists obscured the truth on issues from tobacco smoke to global warming. It was initially developed, the tobacco strategy, by the US tobacco industry, which was aware of the medical dangers of smoking as early as the 1950s, but actively suppressed this knowledge. Faced with increasing and irrefutable scientific evidence of the negative health effects of smoking, it concentrated on misleading public opinions by claiming that the medical facts were uncertain or unproven. The tobacco industry mobilized reputable researchers who used their scientific credibility to deceive the public and undermine the medical consensus. As one tobacco memo stated, I quote, "Doubt is our product, since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the minds of the general public." End of quote. Over recent decades, right-wing groups working with industry lawyers and public relations experts have employed the strategy of sowing doubt to protect economic interests and defend ideological beliefs. This approach has proven effective on many controversial issues, including nuclear winter, acid rain, the thinning ozone layer, and more recently, climate change. Orestes and Conway convincingly illustrate how right-wing think tanks and scientists have misrepresented and exploited scientific uncertainty, distorted empirical evidence, and capitalized on it. The tobacco strategy functions as an autoimmune mechanism. It uses a fundamental element and driver of scientific progress, curiosity or healthy skepticism, to turn it against scientific knowledge itself. The usual provisional or incomplete nature of science is exploited to weaken the authority of its truth claims. The manufacture of doubt functions as a form of epistemological suspension, liquefying truth claims and leading to a lack of consensus on social and environmental issues. Since there appears to be no common knowledge base and a shared regime of truth, individuals and social groups cease discussing possible solutions by questioning the foundations of clearly identifiable yet political controversial problems. The result is a vague skepticism that delays or weakens crucial political decisions. This dynamic is particularly evident in the production of alternative facts about anthropogenic climate change as scientific counter-expertise. However, this knowledge production merely rejects existing findings rather than proposing new hypotheses. It introduces an undetermined negation, where scientific consensus is challenged without offering a specific counter-argument. Instead, the dominant stance is simply dismissed by casting doubt, while simultaneously shielding this doubt from skepticism and self-critique. One prominent example is the non-governmental International Panel on Climate Change, a climate change denial organization, and how it disputes a report by the International Panel on Climate Change. As Niels Kumka demonstrated, the report's findings are systematically dismissed without suggesting alternatives to the prevailing scientific consensus. And now the quote from Kumka: "The alternative facts of climate change skepticism arrive in the political system by being used in the service of defense against the decision-making imposition. The uncertainty that they generate allows the entire system to dither and postpone for the moment the decision between a catastrophic escalation of the ecological crisis and a direct intervention in the economic system." End of quote. The cultivation of doubt is complemented by a second strategy of epistemological suspension, systematic confusion. The essence of this method was famously expressed by Steve Bannon, a key figure in the inner circle of the first Trump administration and later one of the most influential advisors to the president. In one interview with the writer Michael Lewis, he stated, I quote, "The real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit." End of quote. According to the strategy, the public should be overwhelmed with nonsense, disinformation, distorted facts, lies, and provocations. The goal is to create disarray and increase mistrust in traditional media, political, and scientific institutions. Ultimately, Bannon's move aims to paralyze the general population and political opponents through a massive amount of misinformation and undermines the fundamental belief that socially shared truth emerge from rational debate and systematic argumentation. This strategy of combining the degradation and disorientation of knowledge is captured by Harry Frankfurt's definition of bullshit. In his classic essay, he contrasts the bullshitter with the liar and the truth teller. While both acknowledge the authority of truth, with the liar outright rejecting it by refusing to fulfill its requirements, the bullshitter completely disregards these demands. According to Frankfurt, the defining characteristic of bullshit is indifference to the truth. The bullshitter, defined as someone who stops believing it's possible to distinguish certain statements as true or false, is therefore a greater enemy to the truth than the liar. While lies are deliberate untruths that still recognize the existence of truth by attempting to conceal it, bullshit undermines the very foundations of truth itself. While the analytic value of the concept of bullshit is contested, the manufacturing of doubt and disorientation regarding climate change and other contentious issues serves as an epistemological suspension, putting truth claims on hold. This strategy is further complemented by cultivating an affective suspension, and this is the last dimension to which I turn now. Etymologically, suspension also refers to indecisiveness in behavior and uncertainty in decision-making, a form of hesitation and tarrying. Again, it is possible to distinguish between two main variants of this affective suspension. While the first refers to a form of detachment that keeps emotional engagement in limbo, the second operates by disavowing a traumatic reality. An example of the detachment strategy is boredom. It functions as a key way of not engaging, for example, with the issue of climate change, leading to what Ben Anderson called climate change suspension. It encourages apathy towards calls to end fossil fuel lifestyles, contrasting sharply with the urgence of the climate crisis. The current moment appears unthreatening, with nothing to protect now or in the future. Boredom leads to a prolonged sense of the present. The German word Langeweile, a compound of Lange and Weile, reflects the common perception that times pass extremely slow when one is bored. Anderson suggests that this emotional detachment suppresses demands for urgent action and fosters the illusion that life can go on as usual. Drawing on insights from psychoanalysis and social theory, Alenka Zupancic offers a deeper understanding of another form of affective suspension. She characterizes disavowal as a perverse form of reason. That's a quote from her book, which is not merely a psychological tendency or a clinical symptom, but also a social phenomenon embedded in the core of our objective socio-economic relations and the ideology supporting them. The concept of disavowal goes back to Sigmund Freud's work. But while Freud does not clearly distinguish it from other forms of repression, the psychoanalyst Octave Manoni in the 1960s proposes an understanding of disavowal that allows the acknowledgement of the truth without facing the consequences. This mechanism is expressed in the formula, "I know well, but all the same." Zupancic argues that this form of disavowal is a ubiquitous feature of contemporary societies. It enables people to express both knowledge and ignorance of that knowledge simultaneously, enacting a form of recognition that also dismisses factual evidence. Essentially, disavowal provides an easy excuse for claiming there is no alternative to the current socioeconomic system. For example, when asked why they continue to use a mobile phone despite knowing that child laborers in the Democratic Republic of Congo mine coltan and cobalt, which are used to produce these devices, a typical response might be to acknowledge the fact and then dismiss it with a statement like, I know children mine coltan and cobalt used in mobile phones, but I can't live without my phone. Disavowal offers an individual and collective response to the experience of traumatic facts and the numerous crises of contemporary society by alleviating anxiety and suspending the responsibility to act. I quote Supancic, "The result of disavowal is that knowledge remains in play. One can talk about it calmly and not deny its content, but the reality of this knowledge is lost. The subject can access this knowledge, but it doesn't mean for her what it normally means." End of quote. Like Anderson, Supancic asserts that disavowal should be clearly distinguished from denial. While denial is often regarded as irrational and associated with conspiracy theories and right-wing movements, disavowal is expressed by the societal mainstream. It does not deny or dispute the facts, recognizing the importance of the issue, but instead represents a particular way of managing them. However, there's also a curious complicity between denial and disavowal to note, between conspiracy theories on the one side and the business-as-usual attitude on the other. Disavowal enables blaming those who deny the problems, deeming them irresponsible and irrational, without actually addressing the issues at stake. This allows the maintenance of the status quo while simultaneously reinforcing and normalizing the dominant narrative by systematically separating it from conspiracy theories and populist agendas. In this lecture, I have outlined various practices and phenomena in contemporary societies that I classify under the term suspension. I have aimed to assemble seemingly disconnected and unrelated developments and processes, seeking to uncover their common features and shared characteristics. These are characterized by a reliance on and active promotion of states of liminality. Two aspects of an analytics of suspension need to be emphasized. First, it is essential to examine suspension as a phenomenon in itself, not merely as a temporary or derived state or as an exception or peripheral phenomenon. It is an autonomous practice and a key mechanism in contemporary societies. Second, suspension requires explanation. It is not simply equivalent to still-stand stagnation or immobility, but involves a dynamic configuration where what appears immobile and unmoving results from activities that sustain subjects and objects in a state of suspension, or rather enacts a process of suspension. By examining modes of suspension, I aimed to identify key transformations in the present and highlight major trends currently unfolding. I distinguish between different strategies or politics of suspension. Firstly, ontological liminalities create biological states that exist beyond or between life and death. Secondly, temporal suspension includes two distinct forms or mechanisms. Some aim to defer decisions, to prolong the present, ensuring reversibility, while others focus on maintaining subjects on hold by punctuating the present and enacting revocability. The third set of strategies addressed epistemological questions to undermine the social regime of truth, while the fourth and final set concentrates on affective mechanisms to cope with unbearable reality. It must be noted that the analytics of suspension proposed here does not depend on the clear separation of strategies. Empirically, many strategies are intertwined. For example, the ontopolitics of suspension through cryopreserving biological material is closely connected to a chronopolitics of deferral by extending temporal horizons. Additionally, there are strong links between strategies that foster affective indifference and those that aim to sow doubt to undermine claims of scientific validation. The politics of suspension discussed in my talk results in the suspension of politics with a capital P. It turns societal issues such as biodiversity loss or reproductive justice into technological problems and individual responsibilities. It delays decision-making and deliberate processes, produces subjects who remain in states of liminality, thus preventing a manageable future for them. It also weakens the scientific basis necessary for societal consensus on contentious issues. There's a spreading of doubt, conspiracy theories, and misinformation tends to undermine any rational foundation for political decision-making. However, suspension strategies are not only a key element of today's politics or anti-politics, with all the problematic aspects I analyzed. Suspension is also an important means of critique, or rather suspension informs a particular mode of inquiry that systematically tests our normative framework. For Michel Foucault, I need one reference at least. For Michel Foucault, the suspension of normative question enables a non-judgmental critique of examination and experimentation that goes beyond mere negation and rejection, a form of critique he describes as an ethos. I quote, "When I say critical, I don't mean a demolition job, one of rejection or refusal, but a work of examination that consists of suspending, as far as possible, the system of values to which one refers when testing and assessing it." End of quote. Suspension as an ethos also helps to go beyond traditional and analytical distinctions and established critical vocabulary, scrutinizing well-entrenched dualism. It enables us to hold ideas in abeyance, to contemplate what is considered self-evident, natural, and normal, to challenge existing forms of privilege and power, and to imagine alternative political configuration and forms of life. A different yet related idea of suspension as a critical ethos for questioning normative standards and exploring new political imaginations is proposed by Agamben's concept of destituent power. Here, suspension defines a critical force that challenges and undermines existing power relations. Following Walter Benjamin's critique of violence and his argument that the classical definition of revolution and politics tends to reproduce the governmental machine, Agamben suggests a form of power that has, I quote him, the capacity to render decisions destitute, suspend them, and render them inoperative, end of quote. While classical politics always involves destroying and recreating new forms of law, destitutive power describes a force that is neither purely constitutive nor destructive, but operates by putting the governmental machine on hold. For Benjamin, the proletarian general strike was the prime example for this destitutive power. Inoperability for Agamben does not mean a state of inertia or cessation of activity. On the contrary, it is seen as a positive action that disables established power structures in fields like economics, religion, and language, thereby allowing new uses and transformations. Agamben proposes disconnecting the relational bond that links elements within the dispositif to enable the creation of different forms of contact. In this reading, suspension serves as a vital tool for examining and dissecting current modes of politics that operate by producing states of liminality, thereby opening them up for new and potentially better uses. Let me conclude here. This lecture has aimed to invite you to explore mechanisms of suspension as a central feature of contemporary societies. As you can see, this remains a work in progress, attempting to connect observable trends and interpret them through the lens of suspension. There are many loose ends and underdeveloped ideas. In a way, the talk reflects the very configuration it seeks to unravel. it remains suspended, somehow unfinished, interrupted, and deferred. I hope that the discussion that will follow will clarify and refine the argument, or even render it inoperative, thereby fostering new avenues of inquiry and creating alternative forms of contact. Thank you very much.